Today, we are here to answer some questions for caregivers that I receive through social media channels, through surveys on my website and other places. If you're watching this for the first time and you have no idea who I am Pamela D Wilson. I am a caregiving expert, a speaker, and advocate, and I've been working in the field of aging and caregiving for over 20 years. First company was an in-home care agency. Second company was a care manager, where I was also court-appointed guardian, medical, financial, power of attorney, personal rep of the estate, trustee. And today I mostly do caregiving education. And so the thing that I want to talk about today is I want to answer and talk about 4 areas that caregivers have brought up this week about how to gain a different perspective when you are feeling stressed and frustrated and caregiving isn't going the way that you would like it to. Because if you are a caregiver, you know that there are so many unexpected situations that crop up, and you have to deal with a lot of people. You're dealing with not only the person you care for, who could be an aging parent, a spouse, believe it or not, children, because caregiving, when people think of caregiving, they think, oh, it's only for old people. Well, caregiving really begins at birth. When we are a baby, we have a caregiver, and that's our parents. And then as we go through life, that eventually flips, and we can become a caregiver for a parent or a grandparent, other people in our family. And so when that happens, many times it's unexpected. It's some issue that happened, a heart attack, a car accident, something that all of a sudden brings us into this narrow focus of being a caregiver. And I want to start by comparing caregiving to the experience of this pandemic that we have all been going through, that seems to get a little bit easier, and then all of a sudden it gets more challenging. It's kind of like this up and down roller coaster that all of us are on. But what we don't realize is that many caregivers are on that up and down roller coaster every day of their life, because it's hard to know what to expect when you have a parent who is healthy one day and not healthy the next day. And so for this perspective of caregiving being like the pandemic, let me give you some examples. The pandemic has made many of us at one point or another, and sometimes still, self-isolate. Many caregivers are isolated. They are alone. They are lonely, just as the person they care for are. Because if you're caring for someone who is sick and there's all this stuff going on the outside with the pandemic, you don't want to actually go out and bring sickness back into the house, or have your older parent get sick, and then you have more issues to deal with. So the pandemic made caregiving significantly worse for caregivers because it shut a lot of services down. You know, in the beginning, a lot of adult daycare centers were shut down and still remain shut down. Home care agencies would have trouble finding employees to come into the home, or people would say, oh, I don't know that we want people coming in. We don't want to bring COVID into the home. And so caregivers who had a lot to do all of a sudden had a lot more to do. And so many caregivers that I speak to will say, oh, Pamela, I don't even have time to wash my hair today. I don't have time to take a shower. I don't have time to eat because I have all this that I'm doing. And now I'm working at home and I'm trying to take care of my mom or dad and my kids and the dog and everybody else. So to gain a little bit compassion for caregivers is, it's a 24/7 job. And most of us go on with our lives, and believe it or not, no matter how good or how challenging or stressful you think your life is, it's probably pretty good compared to that caregiver who's looking out their window saying, wow, all those people having a great time, and they get to go to work every day, and they get to do this, and they get to do that. And I'm stuck in this house taking care of someone 24/7. Caregivers make a lot of trade-offs, as many of us do in our life. But if you are caring for someone, anyone, you may be struggling to manage your work life. Or if you're still in school, go to school, or manage the health of a parent, or relationships with your children or your spouse. So there's a lot of balancing that goes on, and a lot of times caregiving really tilts. It really becomes so imbalanced. And this is where being able to have a different perspective as a caregiver can help a lot, because we get so stressed. So before this video, I actually was in touch with some caregivers in a group that I have. And one of the caregivers posted the most amazing video, which may not sound amazing to a lot of you, but her mom has Alzheimer's disease and she's pretty much toward the end of life. And this caregiver, God bless her, took a video of her and her mom laying in her mom's bed, and she and her mom were just talking back and forth. And when you think about how stressful life is and how crazy things are and how our emotions may be up and down and all over the place, thinking about that for just a minute might put you in a different mindset, or it might remove you from the situation of being angry at the person who just cut you off in traffic, or the person at work who was supposed to turn in work and didn't, and now it's falling on you. But when you think about those really tender moments as a caregiver, they can be very heartfelt. And that's probably one of the last moments that she will have with her mother. So the role of caregiving does affect health and well-being. It also affects the ability to focus, the ability to go to your job every day and be present and be there and not worry about what's happening at home. Caregivers can get so distracted. And even the simple act of having to take a parent to a doctor appointment, well, that sounds quite simple if you've ever been to a doctor appointment. But when you have a parent who has dementia and they're very confused or they're wheelchair bound and you've got to haul a wheelchair in your car and drive to the appointment and park the car and get the wheelchair out and get to the appointment and wait for the appointment, and your parent's tired, then after that, you got to go get prescriptions and go back home. Taking a parent to a doctor appointment can really feel like an all-day draining event. And the thing is that people looking in from the outside a lot of times just don't have compassion. They don't understand. And caregivers will run into working with the healthcare system, which can also be super frustrating. But this is where having that balanced perspective really comes in, because as much as we can say, oh, the healthcare system isn't helpful or it makes things more difficult, the healthcare system on their side, whether it is a doctor's office, an imaging clinic, a blood work clinic, a hospital, a nursing home, even a care community, they all have their own constraints that they have to work within. And the problem is the caregivers have something over here that they want, and the communities or healthcare system has something over here that they want. And the problem is it always doesn't meet in the middle, mainly because caregivers in the healthcare system don't speak the same language. Doctors speak medical speak, nurses speak medical speak. They use a lot of acronyms that consumers don't understand. And so consumers many times can feel like, oh, the doctor doesn't care, the healthcare system doesn't care, I can't get what I want. They get super frustrated. So this is where coming together to say, healthcare system, I realize you may have all these rules and guidelines. This is what I'm trying to accomplish for my parent. How do we come to that middle ground? And that middle ground really is a good place to be in a lot of aspects in life where we might think that somebody at work is just trying to not do their work, but maybe they're a caregiver and we don't know. Maybe something horrible happened to their mom or dad that morning and they don't want to share all their personal business at work. Or maybe something happened to us and we're having that bad day. So it's the perspective of thinking, okay, this is my opinion today. These are my habits today, but what's really going on the other side? If I can be a little more understanding of that, it might be easier. And this is where a lot of times caregivers will just become so exhausted and so frustrated and throw up their hands in frustration and say, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. But yet, how many times do caregivers realize that sometimes their behaviors, because they are frustrated and angry, make situations more difficult? So as caregivers, sometimes our parents will refuse care. They'll say, oh, I don't need that. I don't want to take a bath today. I don't want to take my medications today. And as the caregiver, we're thinking, oh my gosh, another difficult day where it's not going to be a good day and it's going to be a really long day. But we muddle through. Another thing that caregivers don't do that they could do to help themselves is to ask other people for help. Caregivers feel like sometimes they have to do it all, and if they ask somebody and they've been refused once, they're not comfortable asking again. But part of caregiving is going back and trying to find the support and the help that you need from whoever can give that to you. And so it is learning to ask again when somebody said, oh, I'm too busy today, I can't help you. Or no, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that. As a caregiver, it's that perspective of being willing to ask again, being willing to be open-minded, to consider that, it wasn't really a personal no that we got. That person just had a meeting or something else and they couldn't help us out. When caregivers get a lot of no's, many times that pushes them into the role of what I call the caretaker. So there's caregiving and then there's caretaking. And caretaking is that place where you feel like you have to do everything and nobody else is going to pitch in. And you can kind of become a little controlling of your elderly parent who then becomes more dependent on you, or you actually take away their ability to do more for them than they actually could. So in a sense, caregivers, through their wanting to be helpful and wanting to do good and wanting to be seen as really good people, sometimes go too far the other way in self-sacrifice and not taking care of themselves and a lack of self-care, which then causes health problems, physical, emotional, being tired all the time, not being able to sleep, being a little cranky and impatient with other people, and sometimes just a little bit mean. And so when you think of that, if you are that caregiver and you're caring for an aging parent and you're married and you have kids, what's the ethical question you could be asking yourself? How ethical is it for you to exclude everything else in your life over here to care for a parent? Is it ethical for you to give up a job to where you have the financial responsibility to help support your family? Or not spend time with your children who need help in school and that education will benefit them in the long run? Or not spend time with your spouse and that affects your marriage? So there's this very difficult balance, this almost walking on a tightrope that caregivers do to try to maintain balance, but many times they are just pulled off. And an example of this is a caregiver recently was talking about a parent who had dementia. And the concern was, oh my gosh, this caregiving situation has ruined my life in total. It's horrible. It's bad. And my parent's doing all these things and it's causing all these problems. But the opposite perspective of that is, okay, yes, I as a caregiver feel like my life is ruined. You know, my relationship with my husband and my kids is not great because I'm taking care of this parent who's living in my home. Well, how did that parent get into your home? Who made that decision? And if your parent really does have dementia, did they wish that on themselves? I don't know anybody who would say, oh my gosh, I want to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia, and I want to have the worst possible behavior so that I can torment my children and be mean to everybody, and people can think I'm absolutely crazy, and nobody's going to want to care for me. That's not how it works. A parent that has behaviors or advanced Alzheimer's or dementia is really a parent who is helpless. And if the caregiver is complaining about that, the caregiver has all the control. A parent with dementia can't move out of a house or go care for themselves or hire a care agency or really do anything. And so it comes down to the ethical responsibility of caregivers, even though the situations are challenging and impossible and difficult, and you feel angry and resentful and you hate everybody today, is to be able to look at the situation and say, wow, how do I rebalance this? How do I become that person that I used to like? Not this person who is angry and impatient and hates my parent or hates my spouse. How do we flip all of that around? And a lot of it is really by gaining some self-insight. What is it we're upset about? How did the situation happen? Mostly it's through our participation, which can be difficult to look back and say, wow, you know, that decision I made probably wasn't the best decision. It might have been a quick decision, might have been a snap decision that solved that problem temporarily. But in the long run, wow, look at this mess that I have made. Look at this mess, excuse me, that I have made for my family. And how am I going to resolve that? Sorry about my voice, kids. And so for caregivers, the idea is to seek help where you can find help. Caregiver support groups, online classes, being with other people who understand and who can support you to say, you know, I know you're upset, but think about this from the perspective of your parent or the other person who needs a lot of care and has become so dependent on you for everything. How would you feel if that was you and you couldn't dress yourself anymore? Or, heaven forbid, your son or daughter has to bathe you or do everything for you. It's a very emotional situation for that parent, which can be why they're angry back at the caregiver or not nice to the caregiver. So caregiving really is this two-way perspective, this two-way street of finding a middle ground and finding balance. I'm Pamela D Wilson. There's a lot of helpful information on my website. I have hundreds of videos, no matter where you're watching, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Vimeo, online caregiving courses, my blog, my weekly podcast, which is called The Caring Generation. And many of those subjects come from the questions that caregivers ask me that I answer in all of these videos. Have a fabulous day today, everybody. I will see you again soon in another video.